In the race of rapidly growing global economies, the world has been focused heavily on China and India. However, there is a hidden gem in Southeast Asia that has quietly transformed itself into an economic powerhouse. This is a sprawling archipelago of over 17,500 islands, known for its stunning beaches and vibrant cultures. With more than 277 million people, it is the world's fourth most populous country and the 17th largest economy, and aims to become the 7th largest economy by 2030 by leveraging its natural resources, consumer market, and young population. Considering its past economic performance, this goal doesn't seem like a distant dream but rather a fast-approaching reality. As within just 2.5 decades, it climbed the economic ladder from being the 34th largest economy to its current position. This achievement is remarkable, especially for a country that constantly faces numerous natural disasters like tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and floods. But how did it quietly transform into an economic powerhouse? Can it maintain its impressive growth trajectory and reach the top 7 by 2030? What key factors will determine its economic success in the coming years? This is the story of the silent rise of an economic giant, Indonesia, with the Atlas shift. Indonesia's economic story began under colonial rule. During the Dutch colonial period, the economy was primarily based on agriculture and the spice trade. In the 19th century, the Dutch implemented a forced labor system known as the cultivation system, which required villages to grow export crops like coffee, sugar, and indigo. By 1830, these cash crops accounted for nearly 1/3 of the Dutch East Indies' total revenue, laying the foundation for the country's agricultural sector. The impact of World War II and the subsequent Japanese occupation disrupted the colonial economy, setting the stage for Indonesia's push for independence. When Indonesia gained independence in 1945, the initial years were marked by economic challenges and political instability. In the 1950s, the new government nationalized Dutch enterprises, striving to assert economic sovereignty. However, under President Sukarno's leadership, the economy faced stagnation and hyperinflation, highlighting the need for a more stable economic direction. In 1967, President Suharto took over with his New Order regime, introducing market-oriented economic policies that promoted foreign investment and industrialization. The government also started exporting crude oil. Revenue from oil exports was used to make significant investments in infrastructure, particularly in roads, ports, and energy facilities, fueling an economic boom in the 1980s. As a result, Indonesia achieved an average GDP growth rate of 7% for more than 15 years. However, this journey of economic success wasn't without turbulence. The 1997 Asian financial crisis hit Indonesia hard, causing the rupiah to depreciate sharply, collapsing the banking sector and plunging the country into a severe recession. This crisis ended the 30-year rule of President Suharto, who resigned in 1998. The political instability further complicated the economic crisis. While other countries started recovering by the end of the century, Indonesia's newly elected government struggled hard to salvage the country. Under the guidance of the IMF, the new government undertook crucial economic reforms, including bank restructuring and fiscal consolidation, which facilitated a gradual recovery in the early 2000s. To bolster its economy and regain its pace of economic development, Indonesia launched an ambitious 20-year plan known as the National Long-Term Development Plan, RPJPN, 2005 to 2025. This plan was divided into 4 5-year plans, each with specific goals. At the beginning of the plan, Indonesia was the 27th largest economy in the world. Today, as the 20-year plan nears its end, Indonesia is now the 17th largest economy. Over the past 2 decades, Indonesia has maintained an average GDP growth rate of 5.24%, growing its GDP from $285 billion in 2005 to over $1.3 trillion in 2023. Although the growth target was set at 7%, Indonesia's performance is commendable, considering the 2009 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. And during the past decade, Indonesia's ranking on the Ease of Doing Business Index improved from 120th in 2013 to 73rd in 2020. Furthermore, to meet the crucial infrastructure needs for development, the Indonesian government added more than 24 new ports, 15 new airports, 13,000 kilometers of national roads, and 1,800 kilometers of toll roads. The government's quest to structurally reform and diversify the economy from merely being a commodity exporter to becoming a powerhouse in manufacturing and high-value services has paid dividends. Today, Indonesia is one of the fastest-growing digital economies, a leading provider of EV materials globally, and a burgeoning tech hub. None of this was imaginable 2 decades ago. So, how did Indonesia achieve it? Indonesia's economic growth in the 21st century can be attributed to 2 major factors: the abundance of its natural resources and the prudent use of these resources. Indonesia is a resource-rich country, exporting everything from minerals to agricultural produce. When the government initiated its 20-year plan in 2004, the economy was heavily dependent on commodity exports. The world witnessed a rapid increase in commodity prices during that period, helping Indonesia stabilize its macroeconomic indicators as envisioned in the first 5-year plan. The country achieved an average GDP growth rate of 5.6% during this period, and managed to control inflation, which was over 15% per annum in 2002, bringing it down to 2.78% by the end of 2009. Although inflation briefly rose in 2006 when fuel subsidies were revoked, the government quickly brought it under control. The average inflation during this period stood at around 6%. The central bank adjusted interest rates, the government reduced the budget deficit, maintained public debt at sustainable levels, and implemented programs to increase food production. Furthermore, the rise in commodity exports led to an accumulation of foreign exchange reserves. Blessed with abundant and diverse natural resources, Indonesia exported almost every type of commodity, from oil and gas to minerals like nickel and agricultural produce like coffee and rubber. By the end of 2009, Indonesia's foreign exchange reserves had increased to over $60 billion from around $34 billion in 2004. This economic stability boosted investor confidence, stabilized the rupiah, and provided a buffer against external shocks. During this period, Indonesia also undertook initiatives for infrastructure development, increasing the budget for infrastructure projects from around 2.5% of GDP in 2005 to about 3.5% of GDP in 2009. Indonesia successfully achieved the goal of strengthening the foundations of its economy, and now it was ready to build upon this foundation. Indonesia's commodity exports saw an unprecedented rise. Export of palm oil increased from $4 billion to $12 billion. Production of coal got doubled. Indonesia became one of the world's largest producer of nickel and cobalt. However, with soaring commodity prices and resultant increased revenues, another challenge for Indonesia popped up: the natural resource curse. Being a country that just transitioned to a democracy, and where civil and bureaucratic institutions were not fully mature, Indonesia could have gone on the course of natural resource curse, and particularly the Dutch disease. But it acted with foresight and started to manage the revenues from commodity exports with some prudent approach, which most of the countries fail to do, and become a victim of resource curse. For the second 5-year plan, it focused on human resource and infrastructure development. Indonesia has the highest ratio of working-age population in the region. While other large economies in the region, like China, South Korea, and Japan, face labor shortages, Indonesia has an abundance of labor, with over 53% of its population in the working age group. Indonesia decided to take advantage of this and diversify its economy, focusing on manufacturing and services sectors, particularly textiles, electronics, and automotives. In line with its vision of becoming a high-income country by 2045, Indonesia shifted towards high-value products and services instead of raw commodity exports. It banned the export of raw nickel ore in 2014 and began efforts to build a complete nickel processing industry during its third 5-year plan. Foreign investors, primarily from China, started investing in the Indonesian nickel supply chain, particularly in building smelters. By 2023, Indonesia had over 60 nickel smelters, up from just 2 in 2016. Indonesia's exports of processed nickel reached an estimated $30 billion in 2022, a significant increase from just $1 billion in 2015. With the EV boom in the automotive industry, nickel has become crucial for EV batteries. Consequently, the world's top 2 electric vehicle manufacturers, Chinese BYD and Tesla from the USA, are now finalizing deals with Indonesia for investment. Additionally, to supplement its nickel-based battery industry, Indonesia is establishing lithium refineries and anode material production facilities. These initiatives have attracted other large automotive companies like Hyundai, LG, Neta, and many more to invest in Indonesia. Another manufacturing sector that received great attention from the government is textiles. With more than 5,000 registered medium and large enterprises, augmented by over 500,000 micro and small enterprises, textiles and apparel are contributing significantly to Indonesia's economic development. In 2018, the Indonesian government launched Making Indonesia 4.0 as a goal for the year 2030, emphasizing technological development in 5 key industries: food and beverage, automotive, electronics, chemicals, and textiles. Now, after all this discussion, you might be thinking that export-oriented manufacturing is the thing that has made Indonesia an economic giant. No, it's not. But the story is otherwise. Indonesia's growth model is different from other regional economies, which is based on exports and investments. Indonesian economy is fueled largely by domestic consumption. Keep in mind that in 2022, exports share in Indonesia's GDP was 24.5%, whereas the world average was around 48%. What did the trick for Indonesia was the government's aim to bring people out of poverty, as it thought during the first Five-Year Plan and subsequent focus on human development in coming 3 5-year plans. This added millions of people to middle class. The spending by 52 million concrete and 115 million people of the aspiring middle class actually fuel the engine of Indonesian economic growth. Low inflation rates helps maintain the purchasing power of the people. This higher domestic consumption stimulates demand for goods and services, encouraging businesses to increase production and expand their offerings. Seeing the business opportunity, micro, small, and medium enterprises began to establish to meet the domestic consumption demand, and government started supporting and financing them. Today, more than 64 million such enterprises are working in Indonesia and employ 97% of its labor force and contribute 60% of its GDP. This rise in consumption provided cushion to the economy from external shocks, particularly during global financial crisis of 2009 and pandemics like COVID-19. Domestic demand, coupled with government's policy to go for high-value products, helped in attracting huge foreign direct investment that reached $47 billion, up from $2.6 billion in 2005. This domestic market powered the growth of retail and e-commerce sectors as well. The widespread adoption of smartphones and internet access made online shopping more accessible to 335 million broadband connections used by over 175 million people. Furthermore, investments by the government in logistics and digital payment infrastructure like BiFast, a real-time payments infrastructure developed by the Bank of Indonesia, increased electronic transactions by 67% in 2022 and digital banking activity by 63%. This helped digital economy grew from use $41 billion in 2019 to use $77 billion in 2022, making Indonesia's e-commerce sector among the fastest growing in the world, with platforms like Tokopedia and Shopee being the largest players. The rise of middle class and government's push for digitization and digital innovation brought a vibrant startup ecosystem into existence, with a number of unicorns like Ovo, Linkaja, Akulaku, Tokopedia, Bukalapak, Shopee, and Gojek in sectors like fintech, e-commerce, and transport, and ride-hailing services. So, keeping in view the current trajectory Indonesia is in, it is truly expected that it will overtake economies like Australia, UK, Germany, and and will be the 7th largest economy by 2030 and is well on the track to achieve its Vision 2045. However, a road to progress is never smooth, and nations have to crisscross various difficulties and obstacles on the way. And so is the case for Indonesia. Within the next 15 years, Indonesia's population will begin to age. And when a country's population becomes to age, economic growth starts to decline. The rate and the extent of the decline will depend on the foundation that the earlier, younger, high-growth economy was able to lay, including for human capital, physical infrastructure, and governance. So Indonesia has to future-proof its economy by further investing in these. Because despite improvements, Still, there are large infrastructure gaps, particularly in transportation and logistics. For instance, the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report 2019 ranked Indonesia 72nd out of 141 countries for infrastructure quality. Furthermore, the World Bank's Human Capital Index 2020, which measures the impact of health and education on the future productivity of workers, indicates that Indonesian children will reach only 54% of their full productivity potential. In comparison, children in Singapore will reach 88% of their potential, and children in Vietnam will reach 69%. Human capital challenges, like these, have hindered Indonesia's long-term growth potential since the 2000s and is likely to do the same in near future. Moreover, Indonesia's ranking on ease of doing business is not particularly impressive for the economy of its size. Beside this low ranking, fight against corruption is slowing down, and Indonesia's ranking on the Corruption Perception Index is declining. Yet, Indonesia's story remains unwritten. Armed with a spirit of resilience and a clear vision for the future, it has the potential to overcome these obstacles and emerge as a vibrant economic powerhouse in the region. The time to act is now. The path to progress may be arduous, but the rewards of a brighter future lie within Indonesia's grasp.